Have you ever felt like you are doing grief wrong? Like you should be further along by now, less sad, less angry, more over it? Have you ever been completely frozen, unable to plan tomorrow, let alone the year ahead? And have you ever wondered why loss makes the future feel impossible to imagine? If any of that resonates, this video is an invitation to you. And I want to start with something that Elisabeth Kübler-Ross said that I believe is one of the most tender, most misunderstood statements in the history of psychology. People think that 5 stages of grief are a checklist. They are not. They were never meant to be. They are a permission slip, a map that says, whatever you are feeling, you are not broken, you are human. My name is Maria Vinnicka. I'm a psychologist, a speaker, co-founder of the SOUL Ukrainian Psychology Center. For over 4 years, since the full-scale invasion of February 2022, I have sat beside Ukrainian women navigating grief so vast it doesn't have a name. And today I want to share with you what we have shared with them, the map. Because having a map, even in the darkest territory, is already a form of healing. The map is not the territory, but holding it in your hands already gives you more ground to stand on. Before we go anywhere, I want to ask you something. Think of the biggest loss or change you have ever navigated. It could be the death of someone you loved, a divorce, a job lost, a country left behind, a version of yourself that quietly disappeared. Hold that gently in your mind, because everything I'm about to share, the 5 stages, the change curve, how Ukraine lives with all of this right now, will land differently when you connect it to something real in your own life. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. If anything we share today resonates, please let us know. Are you ready? Let's begin together. Here is what we'll move through today. First, what grief and loss actually are, and the myths that we quietly carry about them. Second, what Elisabeth Kübler-Ross really said, and what the culture got a bit wrong. Third, the change curve, a lesser known but equally very powerful model. And fourth, how Ukraine and the soul experience all of this in real time. And finally, what does acceptance really mean? Because it's gentler and truer than most people think. But first, a word about why any of this matter right now. In 2026, we mark 100 years since the birth of Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, the Swiss-American psychiatrist who changed how humanity understands death, dying, and loss. Her son, Ken Ross, president of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, says this: the world is lonelier, older, more medically complex, and more grief-stricken than ever. Her work is not finished, and this video is our small contribution to the conversation she began. Let's begin with a question that sounds simple, but it isn't. What is grief? Most people define grief as sadness after death, but grief is so much larger than that. Grief is the natural human response to any significant loss, the loss of a person, the loss of a home, the loss of safety, the loss of identity, the loss of a future we had imagined, the loss of a country we knew. In Ukraine, we are living through all of this at once, and the world is also learning from us what happens to the human soul when every layer of loss arrives together. There are many kinds of losses, and they matter differently. There is the loss of life, the most absolute kind. There is the loss of home, both the physical place of living and the psychological sense of safety it holds. There is the loss of identity, Who am I now in this new country, in this new reality? There is the loss of the future, what I had imagined for myself, for my children, my nation. And there is the loss of ordinary life, the small things, the cafe on the corner, the Saturday morning routines, the sound of a city at peace. Every one of these deserves its own form of mourning. And I want to say something clearly before we go any further. Loss is not a competition. Each one of these losses is uniquely deep and uniquely personal. We must resist the urge to compare or rank sorrow, to think my loss is smaller, so I shouldn't feel this much pain, or their loss is bigger, so mine doesn't count. Every human soul deserves absolute validation, dignity, and their own sacred pathway to grieve. And here's something I find genuinely moving. Mourning reveals the immense worth of what is gone. The raw pain moving through your soul, your mind, your heart, your body, it is simply the shape that love takes when what is loved is no longer there. To grieve deeply is proof that you loved something or someone truly precious, and that love deserves honored space and time. I also want to introduce a distinction that I think will feel like relief to many of you. Grief doesn't come in one shape only. There is individual grief, what one person carries alone. There is family grief, what a household carries together, often at different speeds. There is collective grief, when an entire community or an entire nation holds at once. There is prolonged grief and chronic grief, when loss doesn't resolve on any normal timeline because the circumstances that caused it haven't resolved either. And there is anticipatory grief, grieving a loss before it has even fully happened, which so many Ukrainian families live with every single day, not knowing what tomorrow holds. More than 4 years of war have reshaped the entire landscape of mourning for us. To heal, we have learned we must hold space for every one of these forms, not just the ones with a name everybody already knows. In our work with Ukrainian women since 2022, we see primarily two groups. The women still inside Ukraine, living under constant threat, with children who study in basements, with husbands at the front lines, with cities partially destroyed, and the women who fled, often overnight, with one bag, sometimes with children and no partner, who are now navigating displacement, loneliness, a language they don't speak, and a new country that is kind, but still not home. The losses are different for each group, but in the middle there is one thing they share, an almost complete inability to imagine the future. And this matters enormously. In our research, with over 580 participants in the Ukrainian Circle program, we found that something broke our hearts. 75 of participants, 3 in 4, reported they were unable to imagine their future, not just anxious about it, unable to see it at all. When you cannot imagine tomorrow, the capacity to plan, to hope, to choose, to have a sense of agency, it all quietly collapses. This is what war and prolonged trauma do to the human mind and heart. They steal the future completely. And this is not only a Ukrainian experience. I want to say that very clearly, because this is what I hear from professionals, from people going through divorce, from people who have lost a job or a relationship or a parent. The future just disappeared. I couldn't see it anymore. This is a universal feature of acute grief. The future does not disappear because we're weak. It disappears because our nervous system, our psychology, are protecting us from a future that feels too uncertain to hold. Look at this image. Can you relate to it? Have you ever experienced something like that? But the good news is that having a map brings the future gently back into the view. Now let's talk about loss and change together, because they are inseparable. Every significant loss produces change, and every significant change involves loss. When the relationship ends, you lose the person, but you also lose the version of yourself that existed inside that relationship. When a country goes to war, people lose their physical homes, but they also lose the psychological home of a life that made sense. This is important to understand. Grief is not only about death, it is about every disruption to a world that once felt coherent. One more thing about grief that the culture consistently gets wrong. Grief has no definite timeline, none. There is no you should be over this by now. No 6 months is enough. No measuring stick. Unprocessed grief doesn't disappear with time. It goes underground. It lives in the body. It shows up as anxiety, physical pain, rage, apathy, numbness. Unhealed grief, personal and collective, is the seed for future pain. Hurt people, and healed people help heal others. This is why this work matters to us so deeply. This is not optional. There's also something we call transgenerational trauma. When a generation carries grief that was never processed, that grief is passed on, not through conscious memory, but through the body, through attachment patterns, through the nervous system. We see this in Ukrainian families across generations. We see it in families all over the world, descendants of war, displacement, famine, persecution. What is not healed in us, we quietly hand to our children. And that is exactly why timely intervention matters, not just for now, but for 50 years from now. Before we talk about the 5 stages, I want us to sit with one foundational truth. The greatest act of courage in grief is not moving through it quickly. It is allowing yourself to be exactly where you are, not performing a strength you don't feel, not skipping the stages because they're uncomfortable, just gently acknowledging what is. And here's the surprising thing I have learned from hundreds of hours with Ukrainian women. Acknowledging what is itself a form of healing. Not fixing, not rushing, just acknowledging. Now let's go to the heart of this video. The 5 stages of grief. You've probably heard of them: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But I want to show you what Elisabeth Kübler-Ross actually said and what the culture gently distorted. Because misunderstanding this model can cause real unnecessary pain. It has made grieving people feel like they are failing at something. And that was never, not for a single moment, what Elisabeth intended. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross first described these stages in her book written in 1969 on death and dying. She developed them from direct interviews with terminally ill patients, hundreds of hours of listening to people who were dying, who had never been given space to speak about their experience. The stages were not a prescription. They were an observation, an act of witnessing. She was saying, here is what I see human beings move through when they face profound loss. Not here is the order that you must follow. Ken Ross, Elisabeth's son and the president of the EKR Foundation, has spent years helping the world understand what his mother actually meant. He speaks about what he calls the 5 stages refrain. The stages are not linear. There is no correct sequence. You can move through anger before denial. You can return to depression after bargaining. You can visit acceptance for a week and then find yourself back in anger. The model was never a ladder. It was a landscape, a terrain you move through in your own way, in your own time. Let me walk you through each stage, not as a checklist, but as a living, breathing experience. I'll draw on what we see in our daily work with Ukrainian women because their grief is both particular to war and also universally human. Start with denial. Denial is not stupidity. It is the nervous system's first protective response to an unbearable reality. When the bombs fell on the night of February 24 in 2022, many people told me, I thought it was a dream, it was a nightmare. I refused to believe it was real. I felt exactly the same. That is denial. It is not weakness. It is the mind buying itself time to survive. Then anger. This is the stage I want to spend a little extra time on because I think we've been telling only half the story about it. Yes, anger says this was wrong. It should not have happened this way. I deserved better. My children deserved better. My country deserved peace. That is real and it is valid. But there is something underneath the anger that I would like you to hear gently. Anger is often the energy our body finds when it needs to act. When staying still is no longer bearable, it gives us the fuel to move, to protect, to rebuild. And very often, when we sit with anger long enough, especially the anger that comes from losing someone we loved, we find that underneath it is not just outrage, it is love. It is grief wearing a fiercer face. A woman can be angry at the war, at the world, even quietly with a hidden guilt or shame at the person who died for leaving her, the person that she loved. She can be angry with God for allowing it, at herself for surviving. None of that makes her a bad person. It makes her someone who loved deeply enough that the loss demanded somewhere to go. In Ukraine, we have clients who have lived in anger for months. And when we create a safe space for it, when we let it speak without judging it, something shifts. Anger, properly witnessed, softens into what it always was underneath. Love, looking for a place to land. And from there, it can be fuel for purpose, for action, for building. Now let's look at bargaining. This is often the quietest and most misunderstood stage. In bargaining, the mind tries to negotiate with an unchangeable reality. If I had left earlier, if I had insisted my parents evacuate, if only I had done something differently. I sat with a woman for a month who bargained with herself every day. She kept revisiting the last morning she spent in her apartment, the same scene on repeat. What she needed was not to be told to stop. She needed to be witnessed in the bargaining, witnessed and gradually, gently, led toward what was actually true. Bargaining protects us from feeling all the pain at once, and that, too, deserves compassion. Then the next stage is depression, not clinical depression necessarily, though there is a real risk in prolonged grief. In Kübler-Ross model, depression is the stage where the full weight of the loss begins to be felt. It's the stage where the future seems not only uncertain, but absent. No color, no desire, no energy. Many Ukrainian women describe this with the word apathy, emptiness, hopelessness. This is the stage that most urgently needs human presence, not advice, not motivation, not stay strong, not what are you going to do about it. Just someone sitting quietly next to you in the dark, who is not afraid of the dark. And then the final stage is acceptance. And I would like to pause here because acceptance is the most misunderstood word in all of grief work. Acceptance is not saying what happened was okay. It is not saying I'm over it. It is not saying I don't care anymore. Acceptance is saying this happened. This is my reality. And I'm going to find a way to live in it. Not despite the loss, but alongside it. Acceptance is the beginning of integration, and integration is the beginning of post-traumatic growth. Here's the key insight I want to leave with you about the 5 stages. Naming the stage is itself a form of healing. When you can admit to yourself, I think I'm in anger right now. I think what I'm feeling is bargaining. You have already stepped slightly outside it. You have created a witness inside yourself. And this is what we do in our group sessions. Not push people toward acceptance, but help them recognize where they are. Because recognition is the first step toward movement and healing. And remember, the framework is not linear. And I would really like to emphasize on this. And I want to show you this clearly because this is where people often feel most relief. In our group sessions in Ukraine, we've seen a woman move from denial into anger in a single morning, then slide back into depression by the following week. We've seen someone reach a moment of acceptance and then hear news from the front lines that throws them back into shock. And this is not failure. This is grief. This is just normal human grief. Grief is not a staircase you climb. It is a landscape you navigate, and there is no wrong direction. Now, I would like to introduce you to a framework that is less famous than the 5 stages, but equally very powerful, and they are interconnected. This framework is called the change curve. It was developed from Elisabeth Kübler-Ross foundational work, and over time, it was adapted into organizational psychology and change management. Why am I bringing this in? Because while the 5 stages help us understand emotional grief, the change curve helps us understand how we process change. And right now, in Ukraine and in the world, we're all living through enormous change. The change curve maps 7 psychological stages that human beings move through when something significant disrupts their world. And the curve, this is crucial, dips before it rises. There is no skipping the dip. You cannot force yourself through shock and into integration. The curve has to be honored. Let me walk you through each of the 7 stages one at a time, and as I do, I would like you to apply them not just to Ukraine and our experience, but also apply them to your own life, your own transitions, your own moments of disruption that you are facing now. Let's take this one at a time because each deserves its own weight. Stage 1 is shock. This is the very first impact, the moment something happens that our system simply cannot absorb. For Ukraine, this was February 24th, 2022. For an individual, it might be the phone call with bad news, the diagnosis, the moment you are told you are being let go. The body goes cold. Time seems to stop or blur. This isn't a psychological failure. It is a nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do, freezing everything else just long enough to survive the first blow. At this stage, the most important thing is do not make major decisions. You're not meant at this stage to understand fully what happened yet. You're only meant to keep breathing. Stage 2 is denial. Once the initial shock begins to loosen its grip, the mind often reaches for denial, a very natural next step. This can't be real. This isn't happening. Many Ukrainians told me in the days after the invasion began, I thought it was a dream. I thought I was sleeping. I kept expecting to wake up. I felt exactly the same. This is denial. It's not stupidity. It's not weakness. It is the mind buying itself a little more time, softening the entry into reality that is otherwise too much to hold all at once. Denial is a doorway. It's not a wall. It lets us in gently. This is how our psyche is protecting itself. It is actually a defense mechanism and a coping strategy. Stage 3, frustration. This is where reality begins to land, and it is disorienting. Nothing works the way it used to be. The old tools, the old routines, the old map, none of it fits this new terrain. Frustration builds because you can feel that something has changed, but you haven't yet found your footing in it. In Ukraine, we see this vividly in women who have been displaced for months. Nothing around them is familiar, and the sheer effort of daily life in a foreign country becomes exhausting, then infuriating. At this stage, what helps most is practical support, small, visible progress, and community. People who don't need you to have it all figured out. Then stage 4 is depression. This is the bottom of the curve. This is the valley. The full grief of what was lost arrives undiluted. The old identity has to be released, and that release is one of the most painful parts of the entire process. Because with this identity, you're releasing your dreams, your hopes, and everything you envisioned for the future. You cannot build a new life while holding onto the old one with both hands. At the Soul, we work very gently here, helping women name exactly what they're letting go of, what they lost, honoring it fully and giving time and space for it, and only then, slowly, beginning to look forward. This is not a stage to rush through. It is the floor the rest of the climb is built on. And then something can begin to shift. Stage 5, experiment. A tentative first step towards something new. Maybe a small goal, maybe a conversation with someone new. Maybe for a Ukrainian woman who fled, finding one thing she loves in the new city. Not happiness, not just, not something major, just a small opening. This is enormously significant, and it must be celebrated, because the human spirit's first attempt to reach toward the future after profound loss is one of the most courageous things you can ever witness. And then stage 6 on the change curve is decision. The decision to commit to a new path, not because the old one has stopped mattering, it always will, but because life is calling forward. This is where agency returns to a lot of people, where choice becomes possible again, where someone says, I'm going to rebuild, not from scratch, because we never truly start from scratch. We build from everything we have survived. And this is the stage that the soul was created for, helping people find their decision, their yes to the future. And then stage 7 is integration. The new reality is no longer new. It has been incorporated, not erased, but integrated. The loss is still there, the grief is still there, but you have found a way to carry it and still live fully to the best capacity that you have. This is post-traumatic growth, not the absence of pain, but the expansion of a life that can hold the pain and still flower. This is what we see in the Ukrainian women who have gone through our programs, not people who have forgotten, but people who somehow beautifully and courageously became larger than what happened to them. So, how does the soul use this curve in practice, this change curve? We use it exactly what it is. We use it as a map. In our group sessions and in the individual work, we help people, we help women, we work predominantly with women, locate themselves on the curve. And the simple act of seeing where you are, of having a language for it, transforms the experience. I'm in the valley is not a failure, it's navigation. And once you know that you are in the valley now, you can begin to ask, what does the valley need from me right now? That is a completely different question from why can't I just get over this? And you can see here some group sessions that we did in different European cities in different parts of Ukraine in 2023. We have been also running regular online support group and therapy sessions. And we have lots of testimonials, we have video testimonials and messages from our participants that are very heartwarming. This is our true inspiration of the work that we do. Let me now apply all of this, the 5 stages and the change curve, to the specific context of Ukraine. Because what is happening in this country, in my country, is one of the most complex grief and change situations in modern human history. And I believe if we can understand it better, both the pain and the possibility, it can give other people in the world a map for their own transitions. As a nation, Ukraine has moved through shock, February 24th, 2022, through the paralysis of denial, those first days when the invasion felt unreal, through disruption and frustration, as daily life had to be entirely rebuilt around war, through enormous collective anger, a fury that became resistance, that became one of the most documented national mobilizations in modern history, through bargaining, political, diplomatic, and deeply personal, through waves of collective depression. And now, Ukraine is navigating the most difficult territory of all, after almost 4.5 years of war, how to live, how to build, how to plan the future, how to continue process the grief and the trauma while the emergency is still ongoing. So what does this tell us? It tells us that you can begin to process and grow before the crisis is over. This is one of the most important insights we have learned. Post-traumatic growth does not wait for peace. It begins in the middle of the storm, one conversation, one group session, one moment of being seen at a time. Healing is not something that happens after the war. It is something that is happening now. And this form of rebuilding is exactly what the soul's work is focused on. Here's a real example of how we apply the change curve in our groups. A woman named, let's call her Natalia, came to us 8 months after displacement. She was in the depression stage, total inability to plan, complete loss of identity. In her country, she had been a successful architect. In her new city, she was a refugee. She felt invisible and useless. In our sessions, we didn't push her toward action. We helped her locate herself. And she realized, I'm in the valley. This is where I am. And then, only then, we began asking, what do you want to take with you? Which resources do you have from your previous life that is no longer there? And what do you want to leave behind? And what will help you to move forward? And within 12 weeks, Natalia had registered her first client in her new country. Not because we motivated her, because she processed something that was happening in her heart. The external circumstances hadn't changed. The war was still there. Her family was still in Ukraine. But she had moved on the curve from the valley toward experiment. That is what this framework does. It doesn't change the reality. It changes your relationship to the reality. And that changes everything. I also want to address something directly. There is a tendency in psychology, in media, in culture to talk about Ukrainian resilience as if it is somehow innate, as if Ukrainians are simply born stronger. This is a well-meaning idea I want to gently complicate. Resilience is not a trait. It is a practice. It is built in community, through being witnessed, through having tools, through being met in the valley without being pulled out too quickly or without being judged. We're not resilient in spite of our suffering. We're building resilience through the careful, intentional work of processing it, and very important, with the support of other people, with the support of people at home, in Ukraine, and also with the support of people from other parts of the world. And I want to name something else too. For us, this war is existential. Remember, if we stop, we simply cease to exist as we are. We will cease to exist as a country. Russia could stop at any moment, but it chooses not to. And this brings me to the universal relevance of everything I've shared today. Whether you're in Singapore, in New York, in Oslo, in Berlin, or in Kiev, you will face grief. You will face change. These experiences are universally human. And you will have moments where the future disappears from view. And the question is not whether the valley will come. The question is, do you have a map? Do you have a community that will support you? Do you have someone who will sit with you in the dark and name what's happening without rushing you out of it, without trying to fix you? And that is what we offer, and that is what Elisabeth Kübler-Ross gave the world. And here, I would like to share once again something that you don't see in the media. This is the data from our research of Ukrainian Circle 2026. It's our mental health recovery and support program. And this data tells a story that really no headlines capture. 88% of participants said that they wanted to restore their inner strength. 75% could not imagine their future. And the most requested support was actually not financial. It was emotional validation. The need to feel seen, heard, and normal in what they were experiencing. When you are told what you feel makes sense, the whole nervous system softens and responds. I want to give a name to something many of you already might have been feeling, even without the words for it. We call it the trauma of the future. When the ground beneath you shakes again and again, the mind eventually stops looking ahead, not because you lack courage, not because but because your heart is protecting itself from the pain of imagining another fragile tomorrow. Think of it as 3 points on a line: the past, holding memory and foundation where we came from; the present, holding survival and endurance, the heavy weight of simply getting through today for a lot of people; and the future. For so many of the people we work with, this is where the horizon has quietly vanished. And naming this the trauma of the future is not a diagnosis, it's a form of recognition. And recognition, as we've said, is already the beginning of healing. And finally, let me give you something practical, because we believe that knowledge should become action. Each stage of grief and each stage of the change curve needs something specific, not the same thing. Different kinds of care, different kinds of presence, different kinds of support. Let me walk you briefly through what we've learned. And if you lead a team, a family, or an organization through change, this applies to you too. People on different points of the curve need to be met differently, not measured against each other. In shock and denial, what helps is safety and regulation. Do not make major decisions. Find a safe physical space. Eat, rest first. Have one person near you. Your task is not to understand what happened. Your task is to keep your nervous system alive. For the SOUL's Ukrainian clients in the first days of the invasion, this is what we focused on: grounding, breathing, taking 1 hour at a time, sometimes even the segments of 10 or 15 minutes. Then the next is anger and frustration. What can help you here? What helps here is witnessing and gentle expression, not suppression. If you're angry, name it, write it, let it move through the body. Run, dance, speak it out loud to someone safe. And if you can, get curious about what's underneath it. Because anger is so often love that hasn't found anywhere else to go. In our groups, we have specific exercises for this, giving anger a voice, a shape, a container, and then gently asking, what are you protecting? What did you love enough to be this angry about losing it, or from fear of losing it? Anger that is witnessed and understood becomes power. Anger that is suppressed becomes illness. In bargaining, what helps is truth-telling, gently, not confrontation, not you need to face reality now, but a gradual, compassionate invitation to see what is actually true, alongside someone you trust. We don't need to argue people out of their bargaining. We need to walk with them until the bargaining softens on its own, because it always does when it feels safe enough. In depression, what helps most is presence. Not advice, not solutions, not you should try to think more positively, just someone who is not afraid to be near you in the dark. Someone who doesn't need you to feel better in order to stay. In Ukrainian culture and in many cultures, we're deeply uncomfortable with this. We want to fix, we want to help, we want to find solutions, we want to uplift. But the deepest gift you can give someone in the valley is actually your unhurried, unafraid presence. And in experiment and decision, what helps is small actions, concrete goals, and community. This is why the Ukrainian Circle program became a sanctuary for many. Because in community with women who are at different stages of the same journey, there is both the permission to still be in pain and the inspiration of watching someone else take their first step forward. Hope is contagious and small wins registered. And small wins registered, named, celebrated, become the fuel for the next one. And in integration, what helps is meaning making. The question we ask at the soul when someone has moved through the curve, what has this taught you? Not as a silver lining exercise, but as a genuine inquiry. Who have you become? What matters most to you now that you didn't know before? What do you want to carry forward? And what do you choose to leave behind? This is where post-traumatic growth becomes real, not the absence of suffering, but the transformation of it. And I would like to close with something I often say in our sessions. You cannot force yourself into forgiveness. You cannot pressure yourself into acceptance. You cannot skip the valley, but you can. You absolutely can choose to have a map. You can choose to have a community. You can choose to be witness and allow yourself to be vulnerable. And that choice made once, then again and again is how healing happens, not all at once, but thread by thread, soul by soul. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross sat beside dying people when no one else would. She gave them language for what they were experiencing. She said, your grief makes sense. Your anger makes sense. Your bargaining makes sense. And we want to offer you the same today. Wherever you are watching from, whatever change or loss you are navigating, we want to say what you feel makes sense. You're not behind, you're not broken, you're human. And you deserve to be honored in your own unique experience and journey. Before I invite you to share this video, I want to ask you one reflection question. Please take a moment with this. Where on the change curve do you think you are right now, in any area of your life? You don't need to answer out loud. You can carry it quietly. But if you want to share, the comments section is here for you. Your words may become the map, the permission, or the encouragement that someone else needs today. And now, here is how you can be part of what happens next. If this conversation moved you, share it with one person who is navigating a major transition or loss. They may not have language for what they're experiencing. And this video might give them that language. And that tiny act of compassion is exactly how healing circles widen. At the Soul, we work every week with Ukrainian women who are navigating exactly what I've described today. If you want to support our work, if you want these women to have access to professional psychological care, you can do this right now. Scan the QR code on your screen or visit ukrainiancircle.com.ua and you can make a donation, join our community, or reach out for partnership. Every contribution, every single one, reaches a real person with a real story. And to learn more about Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation, whose centenary we're honoring with this series, please visit ekrfoundation.org or scan the QR code on your screen. Elisabeth's work is not finished, and neither is ours. We're honored to carry it forward from Ukraine to the world. We thank you for being here with us today. We also thank Elisabeth for her incredible soul and for her incredible work and legacy. Thank you for watching. I'm Maria Vinnitska, psychologist, speaker, and co-founder of the SOUL. This is my partner, Alexandra. And if you want to stay connected, our English-speaking home is LinkedIn, Ukrainian Psychology Center, the SOUL. And if you're a mental health professional, a company, a foundation, or a university looking for a speaker, a trainer, or partner in this work, we would love to hear from you. The next episode is coming, and it goes even deeper. See you there.